has been lost, hope remains. In the name of humanity, join us to help the people of Syria. The state of Kuwait hosts the second International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria under the auspices of the United Nations. Your help will build our hope and end our despair.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to KTV2's continued coverage of the second International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria. The coverage began early this morning and covered just about all segments of the conference. The coverage also included special reports on the occasion, as well as interviews of some of the VIP guests participating in the conference. Some 62 nations took part in today's meeting, along with 14 UN agencies of various relief functions and 4 regional organizations as well. As today's events wind down and as the meeting participants prepare to return home, we will try to look back and see what really took place today and whether the conference has met its main objective, which is to collect aid in the form of financial or material contributions to be channeled through the appropriate humanitarian organizations to ultimately provide help, support, relief aid, comfort, and any other synonym you can find for the sake of our brothers and sisters in Syria, young and old, who have been suffering from a dire humanitarian situation that continues to worsen day by day, with no let-up in sight. 3 years have passed, and the statistics being released by the United Nations certainly provoke shock and indignation. 115,000 people are reported to have been killed since the conflict began. 2.3 million refugees have fled to neighboring countries, including Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt, and they continue to flee in their thousands day after day. The refugee number is expected to almost double to 4.1 million people during the year 2014. And this does not include the internally displaced people, who number an estimated 6.5 million. According to the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, this is by far one of the largest refugee exoduses in recent history. We have 2 distinguished guests with us here in the studio this evening who will help us analyze what took place here in the state of Kuwait the last 2 days, and where do we go from here. What is the next step in this worrisome situation where no permanent solution is in sight? My distinguished guests are Mr. Yousef Al-Naki, a volunteer coordinator at the Kuwait Red Crescent Society, and also we have with us Mr. Ali Mousa, former Kuwaiti minister who served in the Kuwaiti cabinet. A very good evening to you, our dear guests, and thank you for answering our call. Before we get to our questions, let's start this program by taking a look at His Highness the Amir's speech earlier this morning at the opening of the second Donors Conference.
Amir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jabr Al-Sabah opened today the second Kuwait Pledging Conference for Syria. His Highness the Amir, in his speech before the conference, announced a $500 million donation from the public and private sector in order to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. His Highness the Amir praised the faithful Kuwaiti people for their assistance of the Syrian people either inside their country or in refugee camps in neighboring states. His Highness Sheikh Sabah also praised the expatriates, NGOs, the civil society organizations, private sector, and philanthropists for their generous aid for the Syrians. He called on all warring parties in Syria to put into consideration the safety of the Syrian people above all other interests. His Highness the Amir, in his speech, said he shared with UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon the common feeling of the magnitude of the responsibility that they shoulder with regard to the persistent bloody conflict in Syria and their continued and relentless pursuit to alleviate the suffering of the people there. He said that this was added to the great and increasing challenge of the Syrian refugees in the neighboring countries. His Highness the Amir said in accepting Ban's request to host the conference that Kuwait clearly reflected and demonstrated historical responsibility towards the people of Syria, its awareness of the magnitude of the disaster they suffer, as well as the need to mobilize the international efforts to confront this disaster and alleviate its consequences. He said the conference was held while the scope of the humanitarian crisis in Syria was widening and claiming tens of thousands of innocent lives, destroying all forms of life, and forcing millions of people to flee as a result of an unjust and continuing conflict, where all kinds of weapons were used, including the internationally prohibited weapons against an unarmed people. His Highness Sheikh Sabah noted the alarming number of refugees both inside Syria and outside of Syria, as the conflict has claimed the lives of up to 140 million people. This is in addition to the displacement of millions of refugees, both inside and outside of Syria, who are suffering tragic living conditions exacerbated by the onset of winter. He stated the latest report of the Food and Agricultural Organization confirmed that agricultural and livestock sector have deteriorated to a degree that has destroyed the basic components and the capacity of the country to provide its own food security. His Highness said the deterioration affected an important sector relating to the future of generations in Syria, where education sectors were left behind, curriculums were destroyed, and schools were disrupted, threatening the future of children and their country. This requires setting educational programs in cooperation with specialized international organizations. His Highness the Amir highlighted the drop in the level of health services, which contributed to the outbreak and spreading of many diseases, as evidenced by the report of the World Health Organization on the spread of polio inside and outside Syria, providing the magnitude of the tragedy and adding to the suffering that has befallen the Syrian people. His Highness appealed to the guests participating in this conference and to other non-participant countries worldwide, as well as all international organizations and agencies, to hastily donate and provide assistance to Syrian people. He said that they are all called upon to provide to the world their sense of responsibility that they shoulder to save the innocence of children, the fragility of elderly and women, and the future of the youth in order to achieve the aim for which they are holding this conference. He said Kuwait has participated in all efforts aimed at reaching a political solution for the war there, and has repeatedly declared its readiness to exert further efforts for the achievement of this goal. Kuwait fulfilled all the pledges it made at the first donors conference by paying in full its donation of $300 million to the UN and its specialized agencies, so that they can distribute aid according to their individual assessments of the needs of the Syrian people. His Highness the Amir called upon the UN Secretary Council's members countries to put aside their differences and disputes and to concentrate on finding a solution to this disaster, which has been raging for far too long, with increasing catastrophic consequences affecting not only the region but the entire world as well, to restore to this international forum its credibility and ability to assume its historical responsibilities.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. I'll remind you once again, we have two distinguished guests with us here this evening. Mr. Ali Mousa, former minister, former cabinet member, as well as Mr. Yousef Al-Naki, volunteer coordinator at Kuwait Red Crescent Society. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Mr. Al-Mousa, let's start with our first question. I'll ask that to you. His Highness the Amir's acceptance of the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's request to hold the second donor conference for Syria demonstrated the willingness of not just His Highness the Amir, but also the government and the people of Kuwait to provide assistance to help alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. How does this reflect on the magnitude and as well as the urgency of the help needed to help the Syrian people?
Let's just refresh our memory that there was a conference, the first donor conference in January 2013, okay? And that was at that time very successful.
That's right, 1.5 billion.
Okay, and this is one. Second, Kuwait has a well-coordinated, comprehensive policy towards the crisis in Syria. Sincerely, we have demonstrated that we are very much concerned with finding a peaceful solution to this very difficult situation. We were not, and we are not, and we will not support any killing operation. Our main concern, sincerely and seriously, is to help the innocent, the people in all ages and everywhere. There is something very important happens aside from collecting the fundraising. Kuwait has been successful in bringing the attention of the world focused on this problem, which God knows when it's going to end. So we need to have a well-focused attention to the problem. Okay, that could be seen, for instance, by the yesterday effort of the non-government organization, who simply doubled their pledges from last year. Last year, I think it was $183 million.
Correct.
Now it's over $400 million. More than that, it's just not the money. You have people who need, with different segment, different age group, different problems, different locations. The Kuwaitis here, we've been doing this, not on this scale, regrettably, but all our non-government organizations have been helping people of different nationalities in different locations. So we have the experience, okay, to organize. The organization is very important. So the organization has yielded the result expected and more than that. So it's not that we have accepted, this is our duty, but that the UN to seek the assistance of Kuwait, government and people, is a recognition of our capability of leading such an effort.
Yes.
So, it is part of our national policy, really to provide as much as possible of help and comfort to our brothers and sisters in Syria who have been displaced, made homeless, different ages. I think now the world, since has focus been concentrated on the Syrian problem, it's better for everybody, okay? Because this is what it is. It is a human tragedy.
That's right.
And it must be dealt internationally. This is not the concern only of Pan-Arab, for instance, or Pan-Islam, but this is a human problem.
You could really feel the urgency in His Highness the Amir's when he pleaded with the Kuwaiti society, not just the NGOs, but also the private sector, also the citizens and expatriates living in Kuwait. It was a very heartfelt plea.
Yeah,
everyone
I think you could see it in the next few days that the Kuwaitis will be very much responsive to His Highness request. Okay.
And there were some kind words also from the UN Secretary General for the Amir, as saying that today he said that the Kuwait has become a global humanitarian center and that His Highness the Amir is a humanitarian hero.
Yes, he is. Definitely he is. And we've been contributing to that for years. All our foreign relationship with other nations is based on human values.
That's right.
Okay.
Kuwait has gone through hardships as well.
Yeah,
And
but
so we know what hardships feel.
Since time immemorial, the Kuwaitis have been always a peaceful nation who built its relationship with other people on humanitarian values, and we consider this as part of our value system, as part of our duty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we do it sincerely because we think it is our responsibility. But in this time, it is an international responsibility. Not Kuwait, not any other country alone could deal with it on its own. So coordination of international efforts become overdue. And I think this conference has successfully started in the right way. That is a focused attention from the international community.
Mr. Yousef Al-Naki, I see you nodding quite a bit. Did you want to add anything to what Mr. Ali Mousa said?
Mr. Ali Mousa said it all. Most of the, this is not something new for Kuwait society, as Mr. Ali Mousa has mentioned, and I'm sure he knows more than I am. I'm from a younger generation.
That's right.
But I have been brought up to uphold these values by my family, by my country, to uphold the values of human values. And also this is very clearly reflected in the Kuwait Red Crescent Society values of assisting any people in need in humanitarian disasters and situations.
Well, being from the Kuwait Red Crescent Society, tell us a little bit about the work that they do. You're a volunteer there,
yes,
which is something to be proud of, I think. Tell us a little bit about your work and what the Kuwait Red Crescent Society is doing in this regard.
The Kuwait Red Crescent Society pledges to help all people, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of religion and other ethnic backgrounds. The Kuwait Red Crescent Society and other Red Crescent and Red Cross societies all around the world.
It's an NGO?
It's an NGO, it's a non-governmental organization. We always try to maintain or always maintain a neutral stance to any conflict, to any disaster, humanitarian disaster. Our aim is to ease and end the suffering of any human being in the world. And in recent years and in the past and also now, the Kuwait Red Crescent Society is committed to easing the suffering of any human being in the world. And in terms of the Syrian conflict, since it started, the Kuwait Red Crescent Society has always sent aid to Syria, to Lebanon, Jordan, and to assist and to help as much as possible the refugees, whether they are displaced within Syria or they have moved to other neighboring countries in humanitarian aid camps. So this is the goal and objectives of the Kuwait Red Crescent Society, to ease the suffering of the Syrian people.
Yesterday I had the privilege to interview Mr. Peter Maurer, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And he was telling me about how difficult it is. You can accumulate as much aid as you want, but to get it to the people in need, this is where the difficulty arises. Are you finding the same situation? The Red Crescent, the Kuwait Red Crescent Society, do you face such problems?
Indeed, it's very easy to accumulate the funds, as you mentioned. The difficult part is getting these funds or getting whatever humanitarian aid to the people, especially inside Syria. As you know, the conflict is still ongoing inside Syria. and it's very difficult for humanitarian aid organizations from all over the world to get aid, may it be medicine, may it be basic needs such as food, blankets, especially as you know now, it's winter and it's really cold in that region. And these are basic needs.
Especially near the Turkish border.
Yes, indeed. These are basic needs, and it's very difficult to get these simple items to the people who need them. Of course, it's also difficult to get these items to people who are, let's say, in neighboring countries, such as Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. But it's even more difficult inside Syria, as it's very difficult to maintain a ceasefire between whichever side. In the end, we're trying to help the people. We are trying
Sometimes the volunteers are targeted.
Yes, they are
by
targeted.
both sides of the conflict.
Regardless,
unfortunately.
Yes, regardless of which side the targets, it's still many people are putting their lives in danger.
That's right.
Just to deliver aid to the people of Syria.
I was telling Mr. Peter Maurer yesterday that they are the unknown soldiers. They are the heroes of this very dangerous ordeal that's taking place in Syria. Mr. Ali Mousa, maybe you can talk to us a little bit also about when the funds are collected. You are also a banker, I understand, at the moment at the Kuwait Commercial Bank, chairman of Kuwait Commercial Bank. How difficult is it to get the money to the people who need it most?
Of course, it is difficult, and this is truly diagnosed by the non-government organization in delivering the aids needed in the right time, in the right place. And so I always remember His Highness request to the warring parties, really to take into consideration the need or the consequences of such a tragedy, and to put in the right priority the fate of these people. So the true help, really, first, they should make it easy for aiding, the AIDS agencies to deliver, okay, and provide what we call usually safe passage. Okay? By itself, it is dangerous. Without anything, without any extra difficulties, it's very dangerous effort. So they are really, as you mentioned, they are really the true heroes. But still, everybody, I think we should exert an international pressure on the warring parties, okay, to provide safe passage for all the aids from different organizations and different states, really to deliver aids to the needed and to the needy. Now, maybe next month, we will have an international conference dealing with the problem of Syria itself. Again, we are pleading with them to do their best to reach a peaceful solution to the conflict, because this is the only true way of alleviating the suffering of these innocent people. We're doing our best, the world that is, not only Kuwait, to provide help. But this is only a temporary solution. The true solution is really to stop the war. And that we should work hard. And Kuwait has been, at least we are not the only country, but definitely our policy really to help stopping this tragedy. Therefore, repeating the plea with the warring party, they have to take, humanitarian consideration and allow the aids to go through. I was shocked to find that even some of the donation collected last year in Kuwait, although it was available, they couldn't deliver to the needed people because of certain difficulties in the field itself. So we're not on, the question is not shortage of aids, it is the difficulty of delivery.
A couple of words were mentioned, which is political influence, political clout. Does this help in
Very much. Very much. And again, let's go back to the Secretary General of the United Nations. I mean, selecting Kuwait is not a question of only courtesy. They know that Kuwait carries certain weight. And it has influence. We don't brag about it, but this is a fact. Okay? So selecting Kuwait, first of all, it's being considered more or less a neutral party. So a lot of countries came in to help. We get the focus. Some of these countries around, they do carry weight with the warring parties. So they could influence, you know, this warring party to make it a little bit at least easier.
That's right.
Okay? And of course, we're praying day and night that, you know, Allah yahdihum and reach a peaceful solution.
Mr. Yousef Al-Naki, let's start with, let's go to our next question. His Highness the Amir praised the faithful Kuwaiti people for their assistance to the Syrian refugees, either inside the country or in neighboring states. How do you evaluate the contributions? We talked a little bit about them, but the contributions and the commitments pledged by the people of Kuwait towards the Syrian people. As you know, we were looking at the numbers earlier. I think we have about 500,000, which is the Kuwait government, and about 440 million from NGOs.
Yes. So far, the total collected from this conference is around $2.4 billion dollars. Originally, it was, the United Nations and Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, pledged for 6.5 million.
That's right.
This is by far the largest amount ever requested by the United Nations for any humanitarian situation. And 2.4 million is a little bit over 1/3 of the amount pledged. Even though it is a large amount, 2.4 billion, there are two things we have to consider. First of all, the commitment of all the countries who pledged any amount. As you know, the last conference, which was very successful, around a quarter or 30% of the amount was not delivered. We are
not
hoping
yet.
Not yet. We are hoping that the 2.4 billion will be delivered as soon as possible. Of course, the more would be the better, as in the end we want to get as much aid through to the Syrian people, whether inside or outside of Syria. And as earlier mentioned, it is a very difficult task. I also read a UN report earlier that in order to sustain humanitarian aid operations to the Syrian people, whether inside Syria or outside Syria, on a weekly basis, there should be at least $35 million to purchase humanitarian aid to be delivered to the Syrian people. So if you do the math, around 35 million a week over a year is roughly 2.4. So the 2.4 will cover for a year. And as Mr. Ali Mousa mentioned, this is a temporary solution. We are looking for a permanent solution to ease the suffering of the Syrian people. And of course, that's to end the conflict in Syria as soon as possible.
Even if it ended, and realistically, even if the conflict was to suddenly end, you still have huge problems. I mean, many parts of Syria are completely destroyed. The infrastructure, the situation, I can't see what the future will bring, honestly.
That is true. Some reports are mentioning that Syria has went back around 35 years to 30 years back, and that is really alarming. Of course, we also have to, I also read another report. Mr. Gordon Brown, the British Prime Minister, was also focusing and discussed a UN plan to focus on education for the Syrian children. which is also a very important matter.
Absolutely, yes.
Education builds hope. Education can be key to progress, and also a very important factor to rebuild Syria when this conflict ends, and hopefully it ends as soon as possible. So this is another factor we have to focus: the education of children. During the conflict, many schools have been destroyed. Of course, the biggest sufferers are the children. Children should be living in a more secure and safe environment. They should not be worrying about the
Bombs and bullets.
Exactly. This is not their concern. This is not their environment that they should live in. They should live in a very secure and worry-free environment.
Right.
And all over the world, children are always the future of any country.
They deserve better.
Yes, they deserve better, and they deserve a safer environment to live in.
We have another report prepared, but before that, we'll ask one more question, and then we'll go to the report that we have prepared for this program. Mr. Ali Mousa, Kuwait was among the first countries which fulfilled its pledges in the first donors conference. How do you evaluate Kuwait's responsiveness to this year's conference and to the ordeal of the Syrian refugees? Do you think Kuwait sets a good example of being a quick responder?
Very much. It's not only the amount or the delivery. Look how, whether it's the government approach or the non-government organizations such as the Red Crescent. Our approach is comprehensive. Just we mentioned here about the importance of children education. The camp built by the Kuwaiti efforts always include some schools from the beginning, from the very beginning.
Yes.
Okay, we were concerned and we dealt with it because we took the problem as comprehensive as possible. Yesterday I was in the NOGs, and although the amount may be small, but we should be proud of it. We have a non-government organization here in Kuwait. It's called the Society of Assisting Students. They were not absent because they have developed something. It's an IT approach, okay, to spread information and teaching. And they have very good experience in this. So immediately when the society decided to participate in helping the Syrian people, they immediately jump to this and try to establish what we call IT stations wherever it's possible. In monetary terms, maybe it's not much, but in fact, to provide at least some sort of education was very effective. And this is only an example. So we could say that our effort, and without belittling any other efforts, the Kuwaiti effort was comprehensive, as complete as possible, because now the problem is not only just food and medicine. You're talking about education. You talk about certain
homes, housing.
Yeah. For instance, today I'm bringing what happened yesterday, where the Kuwaiti effort has called for establishing 10 cities, each with 10,000 houses. Okay, طبعا including some medical facilities and some educational facilities. This is the way, because even when the conflict will stop, Syria has been destroyed.
Yes.
Technically, practically, it was destroyed. Any government will not be able to provide and take care of its people in a short period of time. They need some time. That is, if they can make it, because the losses not only in building. How many medical doctors have left Syria?
That's right.
From the Syrians. How many
Scientists,
professors, scientists? You name it. To me, this is a real destruction, not the building.
That's right.
Okay, the building, they lost, okay? You lose factories, etc., etc. But the most dangerous thing is when you lose your human assets. It's very difficult to bring it back, okay? especially if the conflict takes more time really to get settled.
3 years and counting
So
now.
you ask me about the Kuwaiti effort. Yes, I feel very much comfortable, if there is any comfort at all in such a situation, by the approach taken by our non-government organization and by the way Kuwaiti government handled its contribution. They channel it through specialized organization. They channel it to people who are really knowledgeable to what's going on in the field, okay, and who has the experience. And I'm quite confident other countries are doing something similar or maybe equal or better. But I think as a citizen, I'm very pleased with the way the helping effort is being managed, okay, and that when we pledge, we deliver. I hope the rest should deliver.
We hope so too.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's watch this next report and then we'll come back to our guests for more questions.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon today appealed for the world to raise $6.5 billion to help alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. At a donors conference dedicated to the humanitarian relief of displaced and refugee Syrians, hosted by Kuwait, Ban Ki-moon thanked the Amir and the people of Kuwait for the donation of $500 million for those efforts and for hosting the second conference in a row dedicated to pledges for this crisis. He said that he sincerely thanked the Amir for his exemplary leadership. He added that His Highness the Amir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jabr Al-Sabah has made an outstanding commitment to the crisis. He said they owe a great deal of debt and gratitude to the government, people, and non-profit organizations of Kuwait for their enormous contributions to helping Syria and its neighbors to cope with the devastating effects of the conflict. Currently, nearly half the Syrian population, around 9.3 million people, urgently need humanitarian aid. This includes refugee Palestinians who were living in Syria, 80% of whom have been affected as well. The UN chief noted the unrelenting attacks on women and children. He also stressed the conflict's repercussions on the whole surrounding region. Mentioning the results of the last conference, also hosted by Kuwait, he said that the $1.5 billion pledges made by 43 international donors resulted in providing safe drinking water for 10 million people in Syria, health care for over 3.5 million, vaccinations for over 1 million children, and food for nearly 3.5 million. These amounts were used in providing relief to Syrians displaced within Syria and those who fled to refugee camps in nations neighboring their own, like Jordan, Iraq, and Turkey. Kuwait, at the former conference, had also donated $500 million. He concluded by saying no country, no people should face hardship or calamity for helping Syrians in need. It is vital for this region and for the world that the burden is shared. Let us reward the compassion of Syria's neighbors with generosity and solidarity. On her part, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos said that despite continuous world contributions, help is still needed for around 9 million displaced Syrians and 6.5 million of their refugee countrymen in neighboring states. During her speech at the second Kuwait pledging conference for Syria, Amos said that around $2.7 billion were required to aid various UN agencies aiding Syrian refugees. Amos added that meeting with the conference's $6.5 billion goal was a must to help Syrian refugees and those displaced. She indicated that there were various problems facing UN agencies, in developing relief aids to Syrians in their country and neighboring states, noting that this was important to tackle problems for the sake of the Syrian refugees.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to the next question, and this will go to Mr. Yousef Al-Naki. Mr. Yousef, the Red Crescent, the Kuwait Red Crescent Society, how can they assure that the donated amounts that they are receiving are used for a good cause? Well, actually, the other organizations as well. How do we make sure that the donated money is going to where it's needed, and and delivered to those who really need the money, and not to be misused or to serve other purposes?
Well, it's a more complex and complicated matter. Usually, funds don't fall in the hands of one NGO or one humanitarian aid agency. It's more or less a collaboration between humanitarian aid agencies. Usually, for example, Red Crescent and Red Cross organizations from all over the world, when they enter a conflict, they work together. It's like a partnership to deliver aid to the affected area or to the affected country or disaster area. As I said, it's a complicated matter. For example, each Red Cross or Red Crescent organization has different capabilities and assets. I cannot say we are equal in capabilities, or all Red Cross, Red Crescent societies are equal in capabilities, but each one has a certain field. Sometimes they are expert in something. For example, you would, in the situation of Syria, you would have to rely greatly on Red Cross and Red Crescent organizations from the same country. For example, in Lebanon, we have to collaborate very much with the Lebanese Red Cross. So we cannot do all the work by ourselves. We have to be a partner with the Lebanese Red Cross, sorry. Yes, because they know, for example, the area very well. They know, they have their own assets. They have, this is their country. So more or less, they know more than us. So in the end, we are assisting them. So wherever they require our assistance or wherever they require our expertise, they will tell us, we want you here, or we need this, or we need that. And in the end, it's a collaboration. Of course, this happens all over the world. And also, even the funds accumulated, these funds will also, some will go, most of it will go, for example, to the United Nations. And they have their own organizations in which to distribute this aid. So it's a very complex and complicated matter.
Mr. Ali Mousa, how do you evaluate the GCC's overall approach to the Syrian refugee problem? Is the relief, and also the other question would be, are the relief agencies, including the Kuwait Red Crescent, you just answered a little bit about that, are they able to reach the people that are in need to get aid to them?
Well, it is a very complex situation. And this, again, maybe you have to bring the attention of our respected viewers that we need an international focus. Okay, the more transparency, this is the best guarantee. Okay, I, as a person myself, sometimes I have my questions whether really what you are contributing is really reaching where it's supposed to be. And that there is no misallocation
this is the
or
main
appropriation.
concern.
Yeah, the best way is transparency. That's, I mean, if you have so many partners and you go to the international organization where they do have a system, and it is their daily work. This, okay? It's not only in Syria, it's not only in Lebanon.
That's right.
There are so many conflicts, maybe small and big, so they have developed their systems. Okay, but again, the transparency should help. Okay, this one. Now we're talking about the GCC. As donors, again, we are expert. This is the first. This is, yeah, regrettably, this is not the first and will not be the last conflict where we find ourselves as donor to contribute and convince our people that yes, their contribution is being delivered to the needy. Okay, this, you know, our previous experience will lead us to develop our own methods as well. Okay, building school, building medical facilities. This is in addition to providing medical, you know, medicine or food itself or
doctors.
Yeah, but then you have doctors, you have a lots of things. I'm not an expert to say how much, but I think, again, in the final analysis, Syria is part of the Arab world. It's our responsibility as Arab, as Muslims, to help our brothers and sisters. But we are bringing the international effort along with us, but in the final analysis, this is our duty.
That's right.
And I think the GCC countries are doing really fine, okay, in helping. And I think it's not only in this conflict, but the continuity, the rebuilding of Syria. Let's pray that it should become soon. Okay, this is no one country will be able to handle it. Okay, and I believe as the GCC countries has proven in the previous conflicts or wars, they will come to the call. And let's pray it will be soon.
Maybe I'll extend the second question to you as well. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has thanked His Highness the Amir and the people of Kuwait for donating the 500 million, the government's donation, to help the Syrian people. How do you feel about the amount collected in the donor conference? Does it match the overall expectations and the Syrian people? Is it enough? What is enough? How much do they need?
No, it's not enough. If you're talking about enough, no, it's not enough. Okay, but again, and I guess that when the Secretary General of the UN selected Kuwait, I think he knows from experience that it will yield what it did. Okay, because this, I mean, our national policy are known. This is not secret, and this is not a surprise. And if anybody is surprised of what Kuwait has done in that conference, he should review it again.
That's right.
This is part of our national policy. It's known. Previously, we have donated 300 million last year.
That's right.
So if we want other people to contribute more, we have no choice but to increase it. Because we are serious. We want this conference to be successful, and it is successful. Okay? So the United Nations, when it is called, they know what they will get. I mean, once Kuwait accepted their request that we should organize this, so this is you know, this is a state effort. This is not an individual effort. That this conference has to be successful, and it is successful. Okay, and the success is measured. I mean, we cannot claim it just like this. Okay, what has been collected, or the pledges, I don't know how much actually will be collected, but the pledges is almost double what has been collected last year. Okay, so if this is a successful measure, okay, but and here we're not really to brag or be proud or claim to be proud. We're here really to keep the attention, the international attention, the people attention, everybody who cares attention, that we have a very difficult situation in Syria and the result of the conflict in Syria. This is a human tragedy. Nobody should have any clear conscience if they ignore what's going on in Syria. We should always focus on that. We should always do our best, everybody in his own capacity and capability. Okay? As you mentioned that the NOG, they have done a marvelous job. Okay? While their capability, of course, these are non-governmental. Okay? So their effort is, compared to government effort, is less, but it is as effective as the government efforts. Okay, so even today when we are discussing this, we're talking to the people, to whoever is listening to us, that please do something, and everybody can do something. Okay, by contributing to. We have so many philanthropic organizations.
That's right.
Definitely, you will trust some more than others. Please go and contribute. Okay, maybe some people will have an ideas. Be courageous and go ahead and do it, as long as it is humanitarian and it's done in a professional way. So we're talking to the people, to our viewers, whether in Kuwait or whoever is seeing us. Okay, please, there are some people who are only, like our friend here on my side, he is volunteering. Definitely has his own business. I know that. Okay, but he is devoting time, which is even more important than money.
That's right.
Okay, and the human right attitude. Okay, it is with passion done. It's not done coldly.
Passion, affection.
It's with passion. Okay. And although maybe lots of people might not consider it important, but you are dealing with human beings. Okay, food is not enough. I mean, if you can add passion, if you can compassionate, if you are if you convey a message of compassion, that yes, we do care and we are doing our best, and the whole world is concerned about your plight. That could help, and that could be even a pressure on the warring parties. Okay, that shame on you. Okay, that people thousands of miles away are concerned about your people, helping your people, while you don't show enough concern to help them. I hope we can make the difference.
Mr. Ali Mousa, we are here in Kuwait living comfortably our lives, while there are problems in areas around the border of Syria. Now, from what you said is that Kuwait has helped out in building some of the blocks where they have trying to build houses. And are certain camps better than others? Are certain camps getting only basic needs?
By definition. Okay. For instance, some of the camps built by Kuwait actually were designed in Europe with decent houses, and some simply are mere tents.
Yeah.
There is a difference. Okay, but I think these are all important. I mean, to provide a tent better than leave, whole families in the naked weather. Okay, and definitely a built house is better than a tent. Okay, but now this is what's available, and we have to make do with whatever we can to provide any level of comfort to these registered people. Yes, what Kuwait is doing, as I told you, we take a comprehensive approach, a coordinated approach. It's not only food or medicine. Human beings in this age, they need health education, okay, and even psychological comfort if we can provide this.
This is very important for the children, especially.
Well, the children in particular, okay, because the impact of war on children definitely more devastating than in adults,
especially in the long term.
Ones. In the long term, yes, maybe that will destroy their life forever, and this is a huge loss. And mind you, we Kuwaitis, although we were lucky, but we went through this.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have one more report prepared for you this evening, so let's watch that report and then we'll return to our guests.
UN Secretary of Development and International Cooperation, Justine Greening, said that the UK would pledge $164 million to the Syrian refugees. Greening made her remarks in the opening session of the second Kuwait Pledging Conference for Syria. She said such pledge is twice as much as given from the United Nations last year, noting that her country has already provided £500 million since the beginning of the crisis. The minister called on all sides to allow for passing this humanitarian aid to besieged areas and allow the international community to make efforts to save lives, stressing on the need to enable humanitarian workers to perform their work in safe conditions. The UK minister also stressed the importance of helping Syria's neighbors' countries, who were generous to open their borders in light of the growing number of refugees. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Antonio Guterres announced that the UNHCR is in need of $4.2 million in relief for the growing number of Syrians fleeing their country as a result of the violence there. He said these refugees need food, protection, and shelter from the harsh winter, along with health services and education for their children. He said the UNHCR's activities in the neighboring countries of Syria include 3 categories: life-saving, ensuring preventative measures, and enhancing capacity. In the past year, over $2 billion has given food to 2 million people, provided shelter for 40,000 people, health services for 1.25 million, and education for 600,000 children. On Kuwait's role in hosting the second Pledges event in a row dedicated to the cause, he described this as remarkable. He also commended the efforts of the other GCC countries, who he said have contributed a lot to alleviating the suffering of the Syrian people. Meanwhile, Jordan's Minister of Planning and International Cooperation, Ibrahim El-Saif, praised Kuwait's role in supporting Syrian refugees. El-Saif said that the Jordanian government continued to provide all forms of support to Syrian refugees in Jordan. The minister called for increasing contact with the international organizations and the international community in order to provide material support and relief aid for those suffering from the Syrian crisis. On his part, Egyptian Foreign Minister Nabil Fahmy said that Egypt will continue to support the Syrian refugees during their ongoing crisis. Fahmy said that Egypt, despite the economic situation, had hosted around 300,000 Syrian refugees. Fahmy said that his country would continue to support Syrian refugees until a peaceful resolution was reached in Syria. He urged all Syrians involved in the conflict, including the Assad regime, to resolve matters peacefully and focus on lessening the suffering of Syrians. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati said that Lebanon required financial and economic assistance to support Syrian refugees. He thanked Kuwait for hosting the conference, which hopefully eases the suffering of Syrian refugees. He indicated that the continuous flow of Syrian refugees to his country had affected the Lebanese economy. He called on all the international community to help Lebanon to support the Syrian refugees, stressing such support was a humanitarian obligation.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming to the end of this program on the second Donors Conference for Syria. Let's go with the last question, Mr. Ali Mousa. You know, in my opening statement, since this is a humanitarian conference, we can say that, right?
Yes.
We are talking about currently 2.3 million refugees, and the number is expected to almost double in 2014 to 4.1 million. You know, I just want our viewers just to understand the enormity of this. I mean, we are 3.3 million people in Kuwait.
Yes.
Of those 3.3 million, less than 1 million are Kuwaiti citizens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a huge, huge problem with huge ramifications for the foreseeable future.
Yes, of course. I mean, remember that the problem is directly affecting almost 50% of the Syrian population. Okay,
right.
The number of people distributed, let's say, among Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, etc. Some of these economies are burdened by their own population. So when you add 500,000,
That's right.
it is unbearable.
It's difficult.
It's difficult, it's
They are
unbearable burden, because the issue is not merely feeding people and give them some injection or medical bills. You have security, you have the potential of spreading diseases, lots of things which need efforts and a huge sum of monies. Okay, so people should realize that this is really, it's moving into a dangerous level. I mean, just the idea of doubling the number without meeting that with almost doubling the effort and more, God, no, you know, it will affect other countries. Okay, yeah. Suppose a fictitious disease has spread among these. You cannot contain it in the camp itself. It will spread to neighboring regions, and therefore you will have a national disaster.
That's right.
This is just one example. Okay, and as you have demonstrated, you need housing, you need medical, you need security. This is a population of another country. Okay,
Absolutely, yeah.
look how much effort. Although here in Kuwait we have all the resources, this is a state, we have all the mechanism, all the organization, etc., etc. And this is, geographically speaking, this is a small area, and it takes lots of effort and lots of complaint from the population, Kuwaiti and otherwise. So with these refugees, these are human beings. They have the right to complain. And eventually, if things does not go in the right direction, you will see rebellions in these camps. It could be violent.
That's right.
And it's not only diseases which will spread.
Get out of control.
The wrong ideology could spread. The attitude, all sorts of trouble. So it is not in anybody's interest to keep this and let it grow and gets out of hand. So it is a huge thing. It's it's moving into very threatening situation.
On that note, do you see a third, the fourth, fifth
I
donor
hope not.
conference?
I hope not. Okay, and we should not target that. But nobody is in control. I mean, this process is in nobody's control. We should, we hope for the better, but let's be prepared for the worst. This is my concern.
Very big thank you to my guests this evening, Mr. Yousef Al-Naki, volunteer coordinator at the Kuwait Red Crescent Society, and Mr. Ali Mousa, former Kuwaiti minister, and the chairman of the board of the Kuwait, the Commercial Bank of Kuwait. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We wish you all a very good night.
When all has been lost, hope remains. In the name of humanity, join us to help the people of Syria. The state of Kuwait hosts the second International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria under the auspices of the United Nations. Your help will build our hope and end our despair.
Is New York crime catchers. Tonight, the New York City Police Department is asking for your help. Approximately 6 weeks ago at 11:30 p.m., Cheryl Miller was leaving a New York dance club and on her way home. It was at this time that she was approached by a female suspect who pulled a gun and fired upon the victim, killing her instantly. The suspect is New York crime catchers.